How was the decision to build a data center in Saline Township shielded from Democratic input? Murder City visited Saline Township this week, where construction is being done to build a new 250-acre complex called The Barn, which is a 1.4 gigawatt data center being built to sustain the needs of OpenAI and Oracle. Sam Altman attended the groundbreaking ceremony with Governor Gretchen Whitmer on June 1st, which drew a lot of backlash from Michigan residents. Saline's Township Board of Trustees voted 4-1 against allowing the data center to be built in September of last year. The developers then sued the township over what they argued was exclusionary zoning. They argued that under Michigan law, the township couldn't fully block a legitimate business fulfilling a market need. Saline Township is a small rural area made up of mostly farms that doesn't have the financial resources to fight corporate titans like OpenAI and Oracle. So rather than fighting the lawsuit and running the risk of bankrupting the township, the Board of Trustees approved a consent agreement as a part of a settlement with the developers in October of 2025, which allowed the data center to be built. The developers of the barn effectively hit the entire township with a slap suit that they couldn't reasonably fight, so plans to build the barn went ahead. 2 of the 5 board members resigned in the wake of this decision, and the remaining members are facing recall petitions. Treasurer Jennifer Zink was one of the 2 board members who resigned, citing death threats she had received from angry residents. The decision to build this data center was completely shielded from Democratic input. The township said no, the residents said no, but it didn't matter. This strategy of developers strong-arming small towns could become a new template for the construction of data centers in the future, bullying small communities like this one into accepting a deal they don't want. The development companies building these centers understand that people have an overwhelmingly negative view of projects like the barn because they've seen stories about the environmental effects, the electricity consumption, water consumption, noise and air pollution, etc. Sam Altman has tried to assuage the concerns of the community, and the barn's website makes a lot of bold claims about the minimal impact this will have on the surrounding environment. The consent agreement that was a part of the township's settlement with the developers does require the facility to set limits on things like water usage, destruction of the nearby wetlands, and the carve-outs in the consent agreement regarding protecting the local wetlands and limiting the use of water are good, but it's unlikely that Saline Township would be able to successfully enforce it against a giant like OpenAI. We mentioned earlier that the barn is supposed to be a 1.4 gigawatt facility. To put this into perspective, 1.4 gigawatts is slightly less than what's needed to power the entire city of Detroit. We're talking about roughly 1 million ordinary homes could be sustained by this amount of electricity. The barn's website claims that the site will pay for the electricity infrastructure needed to sustain the center to avoid the need for DTE rate hikes being passed off into the ordinary consumer. But there's nothing in the consent agreement they settled on with the township that requires them to do this. The developers insist that they will absorb the costs and residential rates won't go up. But something to keep in mind is that DTE is already seeking a $474 million rate hike for 2027, just after the Michigan Public Service Commission already granted a $242 million rate hike that went into effect in March. DTE claims it will freeze rate hikes for 2 years starting in 2027 if the data center gets built. But there's nothing legally binding them to follow through on this promise. Knowing how they've moved in the past and taking into consideration the amount of money DTE is spending on the upcoming midterms in Michigan, I wouldn't hold my breath. If this data center is allowed to be built and operated, it threatens a domino effect of other data developers sinking their claws into Michigan without the ability for residents to reject these plans.